So you are finally ready to get some childcare. I am so happy for you. But where to start? These Facebook groups have so much information, it's a bit overwhelming. I know how you feel. If you've decided on a nanny or an au pair, I have checklists to take you from beginning, figuring out what you want and writing your job description, all the way to the end, to hiring or matching if you're going with an au pair. This will make the process so easy and so streamlined that you will be enjoying the glory of having childcare and having that support in no time. The links for the nanny hiring checklist and the au pair matching checklist are in the show notes, also on my website, drtoyacoaching.com, and in all of my social media bios. So grab it as soon as possible and share it with another physician mom who needs some childcare and who needs to make this process as simple as possible. Now for the episode.
Okay, so take me to the transition back into medical school as now a fourth year. How did that go?
Okay, well, the main thing of relevance that I remember about fourth year of medical school is that we spent sometimes 3 hours Sunday evenings going through our schedules. We had actually a really good friend of mine came and was Josephine's nanny during that year, although
I was about to ask.
yeah, she was a good friend. She was between things. She moved right near us but she started in August, so we had a gap in July. And my mother actually knew someone whose daughter I think she was a senior in high school, a rising senior. And so she came and lived with us for a month. And so she was Josephine's first nanny for that first month. And that was a little complicated because we had a small 2-bedroom apartment and Josephine was in one bedroom, we were in the other. And so we basically hung a sheet in our living room and that was her bedroom. And she was young. And, so I think it was sort of like having an au pair without any typical restrictions and requirements of their own space and all that sort of thing. We had one bathroom that the three of us shared and basically folded her into our family. And she was like an older sister who was super responsible. Although I remember the first few days, Josephine cried when she was alone with her and it scared her. And so I needed to, you'll get used to it. Like there's no shortcut. There's no way to avoid that. I'm sure we did not pay her very much. I don't remember what it was, but it was very low. But she ate all of her meals she just was part of our family, which completely worked because it made for just an easier transition for Josephine. It didn't feel like shift work.
Yeah.
Which was a much easier transition for me also. And the main thing that I remember is that, so when Rod and I did our fourth year schedules, we had to go to quite some lengths to coordinate so that, like, we weren't both doing Q3 overnights or whatever.
Right.
And so Sundays, we would get our calendars out and go through every single day of the week. Okay, what time do you need to leave on Monday? What time do I need to leave? Okay, so then the nanny needs to be here at this time. Okay, what time do you expect to be getting home? Oh, not till the next day. Okay, I'll be home by this time probably, so that I could send the nanny the schedule for the week, but also every single day, Rod and I needed to be coordinating. If Josephine was sick, which one of us was going to walk off of our rotation? And so, like, when he was in the CCU and I was doing outpatient family medicine, then obviously that was me.
Right.
But it wasn't always so obvious, especially I did an ophthalmology rotation and I had to drive a distance. So even though it would have been good for me to be that, I was an hour away. It was incredibly intricate. And in the end, she was never sick. So we never needed to activate this, but we had it.
Right. You planned.
Every single
Yeah.
day. And while this sounds sort of like a logistical nightmare, I completely don't think about it that way. Because having to do the logistics that way, because we were both fourth year medical students, I knew his experiences and responsibilities were really important. And I knew mine were. And he knew mine were. And his were. both of us in those days totally tended toward being people pleasers.
Mhm.
And if we weren't both medical students, I think there would have been a lot more accommodation and compromise and prioritizing the other person and discomfort saying what I needed, discomfort from him saying what he needed. And so while I've described this in logistical terms, I think this was something so, so beautiful for our marriage because it was a playground in which we had to grow comfortable, each of us respectively, identifying our own needs and being able to sing them and feeling on the same team about getting them met. It wouldn't have done me any personal or professional favors to undermine his CCU rotation because I was in the
Right.
ICU. We had to figure it out. And I consider that something that is a really significant skill. And over the years, we learned to do that in other areas besides logistics, but it gave us a really strong foundation of knowing how successful it can feel to identify my needs and state them and have them met as a team, and for him to state his needs and have them met as a team.
Yeah, I think that's significant. There's a certain level of understanding when you and your partner are on the same path. That's like, for me, example, we had a lot of issues when I was on call in the beginning because he just did not understand it. And he still talks about the first time he came over when I was on call. And he was so pissed. It's just like, what do you mean you're gone? It's like, I'm on call. What did you think was going to happen? Anyway, so there are complications that come with it, or intricacies, as you put it, but there are definitely benefits. I wanted to go back to the live-in nanny and then the other nanny, because something you said about Josephine getting used to her and crying. I very recently had a conversation with a client where she was talking about the pain of hearing her daughter cry. Now, I know you were comforting the nanny, the first one, but what was going on inside of you? Like, was that very difficult for you?
Of course it was, but there was only one right through.
Right.
And while I've had that with other children once I started working from home, much later, I wasn't actually there for it. So, but I would hear from the nanny that, it was just kind of scary for her.
Yeah.
She was a child. I mean, she was 17
Yeah.
and she didn't know if she was doing something wrong.
Mhm.
And I knew she wasn't experienced, but that Josephine cried with me too.
Yeah.
And
She
she,
literally sounds like an au pair, but without the agency.
yes, yes, exactly. And so I gave her some guidelines. And one of the main things I needed to do was tell her it wasn't because she was doing
Right.
that they
Right.
were still getting to know one another without the verbal introductions. And she was a 10-month-old.
Right. Right. So I want to ask about the nanny, both of them actually, because you had an unusual setup and, au pair before its time. How did you go about finding these people? You mentioned your mother knew somebody, but was it just out of this is necessity, I'm going to ask and find somebody? What were your feelings about even bringing the nanny into the home, and how did you go about getting these people for a very unique situation to help you out?
Okay, so my mother knew someone and she knew the children too. And so when we were visiting my mother in December, we met this girl who
Mm,
was a junior in high school. And I knew it was just for 1 month
right.
to bridge this gap. And so she was a lovely person. She was punctual. She was clean. She was comfortable to communicate with. And I just thought, this is completely workable for a month. She likes babies and like she's willing to learn. The relationship,
Yeah.
right. She was willing to learn and I would be comfortable teaching her. And I was clear it would be fine to have her in our home for a month. And it really was. And, because she was in high school, there were some complicated things happening in her family. So she was very glad to be with us. I think it
Oh,
was sort of healing to see two parents being really respectful to one another. And so it was sort of an oasis.
Yeah.
It was not sustainable long term, but
Right.
and she didn't drive. Like there was no getting a break
Yeah.
from her. She was in our living room literally, and we didn't. The only other room we had was a small galley kitchen. But it was really like just having another person in the family. If we went anywhere, she came with us.
Yeah.
There were no professional boundaries. I thought of it much more as like the way it might have happened 70 years ago, or in a country where there aren't professional childcare people, but
Yeah.
an auntie comes and
Yeah.
helps out. And this just was an auntie who hadn't raised her own children. She needed all of the guidance. And so it was much more of a family experience than a
Yeah.
professional experience. And I did not hold her to the standards one might have. I held her, like, her clear purpose was a warm heart and keeping Josephine safe. I didn't have any
Yeah.
that she would teach her anything or
Right.
guide her into potty training. No, 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 no.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was just like a loving presence who would
Yeah.
keep her safe.
I think that is very important. I know this was not an au pair, but for people who are considering one, because even though we talk about what it means and, what it's supposed to be, I think there is still a feeling for many physician moms that these are professional childcare providers. And I think the way that you expressed your expectations of her was really perfect for a very, very similar situation. So I think that was very valuable to hear, and thank you for sharing that.
I just want to add one more thing, that I did a lot of babysitting when I was in high school.
Mhm.
And so I felt like this was just a babysitter with many longer hours. This is not
Right,
an early childhood educator or any of that.
right,
So then the other nanny, that needed to be a little bit, I don't know that I would say specifically professional, because our interactions didn't feel like that, because she was a friend of mine. But I needed to depend on her more. She needed to have
Yeah.
more responsibility. But one of the key things was that we met every week. And one of my high priorities, and it had been with any nanny I've had, is to make it really comfortable for her to ask questions. Because you can very easily get into a situation where the nanny feels like she ought to know.
Yeah.
And I never want a nanny to be restricted in asking questions. And maybe I know the answer, maybe I don't, but I'm definitely going to have an opinion about like which way we go with whatever the question is. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like she was responsible. She had experience being a teacher, she didn't have experience with a 10-month-old, but she had experience with children. And I also mentored her, which, to be very frank, was way easier because I had been home with Josephine for 9 months
Right.
myself. I don't think I could have been so good overseeing my childcare if I had only been home for 2 weeks, because there really wasn't anything that either of these nannies with their different skills went through that I hadn't also had to navigate myself. And I had no illusion that children follow the rule book, or that
Right.
they're not going to cry, or that, I fully expected my longer term nanny to have days that were frustrating, and days when we got home, she just wanted to leave, and days when she was
Yeah.
glad to connect with another adult. Like, I related to all of that, and I was grateful for her humanity. I wasn't looking for a robotic expert. I was looking for a human being devoted to learning and growing and tending my child in a way that was aligned with our values. And there were things that she did that I didn't like, but it didn't occur to me to say not to do them until she'd done them. So that wasn't her fault. That was
Right.
it wasn't anybody's fault, but if it was
Right.
anybody's, it was mine for not anticipating.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
it is a learning curve. And as my husband likes to say, one of the things about children is that as soon as you become comfortable with where they are at one stage, they develop into another stage. And that is also true with nanny caring
Yeah.
for children. And so I think understanding that we're all developing, I definitely, sometimes gently, sometimes silently, sometimes very overtly, aim to guide my nanny's development in a way that would be good for her and my daughter.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's going to be very valuable for many people because childcare is, one of my biggest platforms, but also people have a lot of issues with having somebody come into their home and take care of one of the most precious things in their lives. So,
Actually, I
any
want to say one
tips?
more thing about it, which is
Okay.
childcare, just by its nature, is a thankless job. The kids don't say thank you. They either don't talk or what they have to say is certainly not, I really appreciate what you're doing for. Right. It is just fundamentally a thankless job. And so one of the things I really aspired to with any of my childcare providers is that the majority of their feedback was not ways they should change or weren't being successful. So I, every single day, thank you so much for being with her. I mean, I don't know that it was exactly that line, but like I wanted her to feel that I was
Appreciated.
thankful every
Yeah.
day, which made it much easier to bring up things that were complicated because that wasn't going to be like the entire real estate of
Yeah.
feedback. It was all in proper proportion if every day I said, thank you.
Yeah. I think that's very important because I can see you come home from clinic, you're tired, whatever, and you're like, you did this, and this wrong, fix it.
Or
That,
say
but not, or say nothing.